I'm here in Stirling at Kirsty and Mark's beautiful little Pise Cottage here. This is a wonderful little restoration project of a heritage home built in 1854, made out of Pise, which is stone, timber and mud, principally. It's a very basic kind of cottage built back then, but with something like this, to restore it properly, being authentic and true to the restoration principles, there is so much going on. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The first thing you notice, of course, is this bright new tin on the roof. This kind of corrugated iron roof was invented in 1829 by Henry Robinson Palmer in the UK. He was an architect and an engineer, invented the idea of the corrugation up there. You'd think, looking at that, sure, I can go get some wrinkly tin from up the road, but this is very precise. There's all these technical details about it. Its pitch, its depth, its gauge, which you have to match exactly to what you've got in a traditional build. Another thing about the heritage here is something like this. This beautiful little dowel railing. It's a very unusual little design. It's a traditional kind of railing that was very much a colonial style. We don't see many of these around anymore because the way they were built meant they weren't very weather protected. What I mean by that is, if you can imagine putting this top rail in, the water would sit on a flat here, these dowels would go through the hole and water would sit right in this little joint here, rotting out the timbers. So while this was very, very common in Adelaide, for example, in the 1850s, thereabouts, you don't see many of them today. Kirsty and Mark, they thought, we're going to bring that back. We're going to put something traditional here. And they've done some smart stuff by just beveling the top of the rail there so the water slides off and doesn't stay in the joint, and they've siliconed around the joint as well. So this one will last heaps longer. The other thing about a little build like this is that there's so much goes on underneath the floor. These old buildings, they were often built with timber literally sitting on the ground. So is it any wonder that they all started to sort of fall apart when the weather and the termites got into that timber? So a big part of this project was redoing all the foundations. Poor Kirsty, she had to spend ages putting this wall back together. This is actually a dry wall, which means all of these stones were built with no mortar at all. They were just stacked on top of each other. Given that, it still lasted over 150 years. That's amazing. But one of the big things you can't see is the amount of time and effort they had to do that big foundation, which runs right there around the corner. That foundation, to stop this building moving, had to be about 400 wide by about 900 deep to stop the whole building moving. So that's an enormous amount of engineering in there for such a tiny little project. So when you think of those sort of things, you think, yeah, simple little cottage, what a wonderful, beautiful little thing to look at. Actually, all these technical things that are sitting underneath there make it a really challenging traditional restoration project. But the thing I like the most is that all those technical details immediately bring you to these beautiful social and cultural histories, which are the histories of Australia.